my understanding is that the more radical voices on the climate amelioration front presume that it's simply impossible for upcoming generations of people in the West, and certainly people in the developing world, to aspire to anything even approximating the standard of living that we currently enjoy, and that they should bloody well get used to having less, and the sooner the better. And so the fact that young people are being priced out of the housing market, let's say, and face a more uncertain economic future in some ways, looks to me like a feature, not a bug. It's something that's actually part of the plan. Because if your viewpoint is fundamentally Malthusian, you think, well, human beings will multiply until there's far too many of us, and there'll be a catastrophe as a consequence, which is pretty simple-minded biological modeling, by the way, then you're going to assume that everything has to be oriented towards placing extremely severe constraints on growth. And if that means impoverishing people now, while you're forestalling some hypothetical future catastrophe, and that's entirely justifiable. And it seems to me we're running down that road as fast as we possibly can, with moral flag firmly in air, saying to young people and the developing world, well, we had it pretty good, but we probably burnt up more than we should have. And I think it's time for you guys to pay. And so, I don't buy any of that, because I don't think the limits to growth model is biologically appropriate in the least, because human beings aren't yeast in a petri dish by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that the idea that we need to impoverish the poor and the young to save the planet is not only morally reprehensible and arrogant, but will also produce a far worse planet on the environmental front. I think all the data suggests that. And so I don't exactly understand why people are buying into this with such avidity, because there's no evidence whatsoever that it's producing the results that are intended, even by the people who are pushing forward the policies.
A lot of issues in there. Let me have a little bit of a go. Let me have a little bit of a go. I think you're right. Our parliaments now are infused with a lot of people who think we've got to stop growth and wind it back. Mm-hmm. But they won't tell you that. Mm-hmm. So I had a scientist say to me a couple of years ago, when I said, we've got to be really careful on climate change policy. If we frighten the living daylights out of our kids so that they're all so depressed as we're told they are, because they think there's no future, rather than saying, well, here's a challenge, let's go out and try and solve it. Mm-hmm. We've solved other challenges, we can solve this one. Mm-hmm. They've become very defeatist, and now we get stories all the time about young men having vasectomies because they didn't want to bring children into this terrible world. Mm-hmm. And the scientist said to me, well, it's because governments are not taking effective control over climate, and that's what's depressing the children. So I went to Australia's, the bloke I respect most, a fellow called McCrindle in this country. He has a research outfit. And I asked him, I said, there's anxiety amongst our young people, record numbers of kids expressing anxiety because of climate change. Mm-hmm. I think the world's going to end. Mm-hmm. He said, no, it's much more complicated than that. The kids are smart. They're working out it's going to be really hard for them to get a job. Mm-hmm. They're working out that it's going to be really hard for them to afford a home. They're working out that probably means they're going to have to live at home and not go and fly. They're working out that romance is very difficult. They're worried about climate. But there's a whole heap of things. Mm-hmm. So there you have it. So you couldn't possibly confess your policies were going to make it even harder for young people. Mm-hmm. So this is at the heart, in my view, of a lot of the problem we now have. I alluded to it briefly. Traditionally in Australia, we've had three broad philosophical political streams. Conservatism, nothing left to conserve, so they haven't got much to say. The classic Liberals believed in small government, in free enterprise, strong civil societies. Well, now they look to government for everything, it seems. And the Social Democrats, your sort of left of centre types, many of whom, look, they were pretty noble. Their objectives, at least, were noble. The last time I said this,
that was particularly true of the union leader types and the people who were really working for the working class.
Many of them were people who just wanted the weak and the oppressed and the marginalised to be recognised as members of the community, as part of the family Australia. That's noble. Mm-hmm. Might disagree with what they wanted to do. We used to have these arguments in the parliament. People had views and they assessed the issues of the day. They looked through the lens of the issue, to what they thought Australia should look like. But now there's a fourth, which is this inversion of our traditional belief system, so that now the problem is that Mother Earth is God. We're the enemy of Gaia. Mm-hmm. We're the ones who have offended, and we must atone by maybe we've got to reduce our living standards. Mm-hmm.